Hi guys, and welcome to this week's Dev Diary, episode 7 for the 29th of September 2017. So let's get right into it. So we were working on our terrain and some of the set dressings and stuff like that. So if I just go across here, we'll go full screen with this. So I got some of the scale of the foliage and kind of the textures working good. I still have a lot of other work to do, but overall the basics of the landscape auto material are working pretty good. I'm happy all in all with how everything's going. Some of the density could be a bit better, maybe not as dense with some of the foliage. So I'll just bring up a stat unit graph to give you an idea. Stat unit graph. So we're coming in at 16 milliseconds per frame. I wouldn't like to go much higher than that. In fact, I'm going to have to come under that. You can see our graph, our draw is fluctuating quite a bit. We're up from 3 milliseconds anywhere to 12. Again, that's due to just the density of the grass. I've also messed with some of the LOD settings on the landscape itself, so I'd like to get that sorted. I'm playing on an analog stick here, so considering like the drop in frame rate to 30 frames per second for Twitch and kind of OBS and stuff, it's not great. I'm going to have to do a bit of work on that and get the density sorted and some of the lodding and the terrain back to kind of something that's a bit more workable. But you can see that our grass and stuff is working. I had to adjust some of the color values to get it all kind of sitting. At the moment we started just before sunset, so the sun's starting to go down here in our ultra dynamic sky, so colors are kind of working. I've been testing them under different lighting and kind of doing my best to kind of get them to work the way we want them to. We'll definitely have to bring down the density and kind of optimize and stuff, but all in all it's kind of working pretty good. So I'm just going to quit out of that. Okay, so you can see it here in a smaller viewport here in the editor. It's getting there. It's getting there. Our component size, we have a lot more components in this landscape than we had in the previous one. That was just so that we could get the best results with the landscape auto material. If we reduce the number of components and the amount of tessellation, we would probably end up with something that, where we could get less vertices, less blending between our materials and our textures, and it just wouldn't look as good. It would look sharper and kind of a bit more past gen. I reworked a lot of the areas. There was, if you remember from previous versions of the project, I had a little cave section here. It was quite a large component to have to redo, and it involved kind of having grass on my terrain that had to match that on the component which I was replacing in my content creation tools. So if I just go into here, you can see that my component size is smaller again. So around here we're going to have our cave entrance, so that means that anywhere you see grass here on the top of the component and on the adjacent ones, I'll have to resculpt the terrain there so it's mostly rock, so that we don't end up in a situation where we have seams. If there were grass there, I'd probably have to try and match the textile density of the grass both the custom geometry coming in and on the landscape, and that would be a pain to say the least. So with that in mind, let's move on and talk a bit about our set dressings. Now, as you can see, we don't have our roads in. A lot of the trees are gone, and I've removed the houses for now. The reason being, I want to get everything kind of working a bit better. It's kind of a case of one step forward, two steps back. So with that in mind, just to get everything working with the landscape auto material, I kind of had to remove those things. Things are always quicker the second time around, and I'll probably have an easier job of getting the roads done on the splines and getting the trees in once I've got everything working and I'm happy with it here. So with that said, let's move on to set dressings. So you can see here I sculpted these set dressings. There's 4 of them in all of these type of set dressing. I'm not happy with the result. I probably will hold on to these assets. There may be places where I can use them, but to be honest with you, considering the amount of time I put into these, they're not exactly what I was looking for. I had tried sculpting different set dressings and kind of creating them in my sculpting tools. Some of them looked okay, but they were very kind of one use. They were only kind of usable in the kind of area that they were created for. And then I kind of switched and I used displacement mapping and other techniques in my content creation tools, kind of sub-div modeling techniques, to create the ones you see here. So they were all created from the same base tessellation mesh and displaced using different custom textures, and then retopologized, UV'd, the usual workflow, and brought back in here into the engine with their own normals applied to them, and then the normal maps of the same materials you see around them, kind of the major and the minor normals that we talked about before, and how it's important to use both. So with that said, not a great result. I'll probably hold on to them. There might be some places where I can use them in the future, but I'll be steering away from kind of creating assets like that in the future. So with that in mind, I decided, well, maybe the answer isn't to go so high poly, so I created this one, and it's quite low poly, as you can see from kind of the edges there. I mean, there's probably more geometry underlying than that, but they're the major edges. It has smoothing groups, that kind of, and its UVs kind of match those smoothing groups. Just one piece of geometry that I kind of did some retopo on the underlying landscape, which I exported with a nice offset, then extruded back into it and kind of modeled, extruded out some faces and kind of modeled in the detail that you see there. Might be useful in areas where the player isn't going to be that often and where we can afford to go lower res, lower poly, but all in all, not a great solution. And then I kind of moved on to this, which is, even though it doesn't have a custom texture, it is one sculpted piece of geometry. One contiguous mesh of 3 components. Usually I try and keep things contiguous, especially with smaller scale assets, but considering that these are quite large, I'll probably move away from creating ones like this in the future. There may be places where I can get away with using kind of this idea, but all in all, I don't think I'll continue on kind of creating assets like that. I believe the solution is, if I just drag this up so you can get a look at it. Again, this is see there's a bit of vertex paint of wet sand there, but ignore that for now. It has no back face, it has no back to it and no bottom. It's just kind of created as such just to sit in to wherever it's placed. Its only really use is in that kind of scenario, and that's fair enough. I probably will create assets that are kind of roughly follow the same kind of idea, but I think in the long run it'd be better to create a library of rocks and kind of cliff set dressings that I can kind of kit bash out in my content creation tools using the exported landscape. I'll freeze it and decimate it so that it's and optimize it so that it's more kind of user friendly in content creation tools. As when you export landscapes, you know, it's going to be a high poly and it's going to hog resources. So considering it's only for kind of eyeballing within your content creation tools, be it Maya or Max or Blender or whatever your chosen package is, I'll probably create a library of rocks and just kind of put them into the landscape as they are, and then go around and optimize and delete the faces that aren't needed. This means that I have a full library of rocks that I'm free to use in other cases and in other scenarios and places to kind of place in the landscape, different orientations and stuff like that. So I'm not creating assets that are only kind of one-hit wonders that can only be used in one part of the map and not used in others. So that said, I'm just going to undo that, leave it back in there. But you can kind of see even the basic sculpts on that. It's a lot better. It's getting there. But I was kind of looking at games like Skyrim and other open world games, like The Witcher 3 that I'm playing through the Game of the Year edition at the moment with all the add-ons, and I'm kind of as I'm playing, I'm kind of keeping an eye out at kind of how they do stuff. This would be a time saver in the long run, considering that we have an entire island to do, and we may have, depending on how successful the project is, we may have more to do in the future. So to leave ourselves with a kit that we can quickly bash out different islands and keep a high fidelity would be good. Another thing that I'm also going to do is, rather than do my vertex painting in the actual engine, when I retopologize, I'll be able to assign the different vertex colors to the edges, so that, say I have edge wear, which you don't see on this, it just has a generic material on it for now, but when I create a custom material for it, rather than have to paint that detail in my sculpting packages or my painting tools, I'll do it. I'll lean on the vertex paint here in Unreal, but I'll assign the vertex colors in my content creation by inserting edge loops either side of major edges, so that I can contain that kind of edge loop, kind of edge wear texture to just certain parts of the edge loop, and also it'll give me a chance to kind of then kind of roll back to the vertex painting tools in Unreal to kind of remove some or add a bit more, or kind of change things up and get it looking a bit unique. And that way I can have a whole library of rocks that I can kind of work on and optimize in my content creation tools and bring it into Unreal kind of seamlessly and kind of faster. Again, it is very much a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or even 2 steps back, 1 step forward. But every step we take from here on out, things will be a lot more efficient and just easier to work with. At the moment, I think for the next week to week and a half, I'm going to spend creating a library of rocks similar to this, that I can just quickly create and set dress the entire cliffs. Because we're using the landscape advanced material, the more procedural material, I don't need to go crazy in every area, but I definitely do need to set dress the major kind of centerpiece areas, the hero areas. So the dock here, which I'm kind of starting to call this area, it'll definitely need most of the kind of attention. So if I hide that, I won't be using that, but it'll give you a better idea. I'll just move that into location roughly, and it already kind of looks better than I did with the kind of the other one behind it. But basically, to come up with a nice kit bash system throughout the week, maybe the next week and a half, just spend creating a library of rocks, placing them inside my content creation tools and optimizing them then once they're in, and then utilizing the vertex paint once I'm in here. If I get bored during the week, I'm also going to get rid of some of the high ground and reintroduce some more beaches and more low-lying areas, especially here on the east side of the island, where there's less, where you'd expect less wave action and stuff like that. But even with that said, I'm going to remove some of the cliffs on this side and reintroduce some more beached areas. Not only will it save me time, but it'll also make for a more interesting environment for the player to explore, and just kind of mix things up, a bit more environmental storytelling, and it'll just make my life in the long run a lot easier. So with that said, hopefully in the next week, and if I get bored as well, I might do some more of the roads and the splines and stuff, because everything's ready for that. We've kind of got the pipeline up and going for that, even though we don't see roads now. In the previous version of the project, I had everything set up and ready to go. All those assets have been transferred over into this project file, so we'll be able to quickly do the roads. So I probably might do a bit of that. Unlike before, where I had set up one village and a corresponding one to the north there, I'd like to just kind of focus here and work my way out. Once I get the look and feel of the village here and its roads and everything done, it'll kind of inform me as to how many, more kind of custom set dressings I need to make, if any, and it'll just kind of give me an area to work from. Prior to this, I had a house in a forest here that kind of served as that, but as the topography of the landscape is going to change quite a bit in the next couple of iterations, I think I'll work from this area. It's kind of the one I'm the most happy with, and the one I kind of where my kind of interest is kind of being sparked. My imagination is kind of giving me some great ideas of kind of what to do here. So yeah, so hopefully when we come back for episode 8 next week, we'll have our library of rocks completed, and at least some of the kit bash set dressing started. And I'll be able to show you guys a bit more than that. We might have some of the roads, no promise. And I think, as I was saying before, if I'm using this as a centerpiece and working my way out for it, I may leave changing the topology of the landscape in other areas as I kind of approach them, as I kind of work on whatever kind of centerpiece asset is going there. So guys, thanks for tuning in. That was episode 7 we're on of Dev Diary for September 29th. October, we'll have to plan maybe something a bit spooky for Halloween shortly. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. If you have any comments or advice, hit me up in the comment section, and I'll chat to you all again soon.